So let's start with the painting process. The painting process is going to consist of us selecting these joints, and you're going to see that the left middle O2, that's this guy right here, is selected. We don't even have the option of seeing the other joints like the very fingertip here because they are not included in the influences. So when we did not have them selected before we but set the geometry to be a smooth skin, by binding it as a smooth skin, those are not effectors. So the tips of the fingers are not effectors, so they will not show up in here. So it's another nice tool that we don't have to worry about when it comes to painting weights or accidentally adding influences on these joints. Now, I have that one selected. If I select the middle finger, you guys can see basically how this is laid out. Now, one thing to take into consideration is this is a very thin character. The fingers are thin, they're not very close to each other, and the arms and body are thin, so we might have a better result with this type of character than we would with a character that had chubby fingers that were closer together, or so on and so forth, because you will see sometimes that what happens is these joints, like this joint, will have will be affecting the vertices of this finger and the vertices of this finger, and sometimes when you move the finger it will be pulling some of those vertices along with it, and we don't like that effect because it just looks really horrible, and sometimes it can be very hard to clean up if the geometry is too close. Those are some of the things to take into account when you're modeling. Okay, now I'm going to come down here in my settings because I do want to talk about the modes. Oops, I didn't mean to tear that off. I can just come back here and put it there. Now, the modes here are the types of painting that we are doing. Right now, paint mode is basically going to be saying, hey, the stuff that we have under our colors right down here, we're going to be painting the colors in. The colors are going to indicate the value, okay? The value of how much something is affecting another object here. And for us, we're working in a component-based or a component mode style because we're saying the joints here, the joints themselves are affecting the vertices of the geometry. So we're going to be painting how much the value of one joint or how strong the value of that joint is on some of the vertices. So again, the brighter the white or the thicker the white, the more it will be working with this mesh or forcing this mesh to move along with it. Now as it grays out, as it goes this way, it loses some of its opacity, then it will smoothly roll off and affect this one a little bit less than these ones right here in the white. So this one will move along with it, but it will move a little bit less than this one would move. It's not directly going to move with this joint because it might be moving with this joint as well. So this one has a little bit of pull between the two joints, and the best way to check that is to do this whole bit, and you see that it is influenced a little bit by this joint, and it's a little bit influenced by this joint. More so this joint, which is the root joint, than this other joint, which is the middle joint. And that could be something that we can change by painting the weights. Okay, so we are in a painting mode. We do have with this tool a select option, so we are able to select or paint select what we would like to work with. And this is going to be parts of where we could select some of the vertices and such in different modes. We're not going to mess with this very much. We're just going to be painting our weights. So these things are options that you can look up on your own, maybe try out on your own, but for this class we really only need to paint the weights. We should be okay with the basic settings of this. Now, we have the different type of operations here. The operation here that says replace, it's going to replace the section completely, and that's basically saying that I'm going to replace it with a certain color. So right now this value here of 1 is going to be a value that is pure white. The value of 0 is going to be a value that's black. So let's say that I was going to come to the finger up here at the tip, and if I was going to paint, a value of 0 is going to be me painting in black. Now, I can paint in the painting mode, the operation being replace. What am I going to do? I'm going to replace any color that I'm painting over with the color or value of color that I am painting. Now with your mouse in place, if you were to click and drag, you see that I'm painting away. So I can click and I'm replacing that with black. Okay? And I'm basically saying that this joint is not going to have effect over these two vertices. Now our geometry, the way that it works is that the other vertices are going to kind of take this along with it a little bit, because there's probably some influence that it has. And we can test it. I mean, let's select the joint and I'll rotate it. Oh, nope. And it's leaving it behind because now there's no other joints affecting or taking those vertices with it. So what the replace did is it replaces the color there completely. You're going to see that we have the option to replace color. And I'm using a brush, so the value is going to be based off of my brushes. You're going to see that I didn't have a hard edge as I painted over this and replaced its value with this value, a value of 1 to a value of 0, absolute 0. If I did a hard brush, for instance, and I came over here and I did this type of effect, as I paint the vertices, it's making more of a hard edge to where it's going to cut off, as opposed to the soft brush here would make less of a hard edge. And you're seeing that I have grays around here because this is a soft brush, and the way that the brush works is that you could think of the center being the strongest point, and it dies out, so it fades out. So I'm going to undo those two paints, and I generally work with the soft brush unless I absolutely need a hard brush. But the soft brush will give me this effect right in here, to where I will get scales of gray. That way I don't get hard folds. And again, hard folds, as I was telling you before, is kind of like folding a piece of paper. It's a really hard edge, and it doesn't always look the best or work the best, because we'd have to go in there and fix that later, when we could just be using a soft brush. So it's going to be up to you how you want to work with this. Alright? That's the replace mode. You're going to completely replace the color that's there, or the value that's there, with whatever value you determine in here. The add is going to add to something. So I can add to the colors here. Like if I change this back to a value of 1, which is going to be painting in white, or I put like a value of 0.1. Let's do that. That's probably a good way of working, because I can show you this a little better. A value of 0.1 says that when I click and drag this, I'm adding 10% with each drag. And that's the way the add function works. Now if I click and drag again, I'm adding another 10% to that 10% that was there. So I'm adding percentages every time I click and drag, and you're going to see that that gets stronger and stronger. And now these are going to follow this joint as well. Okay, so I'm going to undo those, and basically that's the way add works. I don't use scale a whole lot, and you're going to see that scale is going to kind of paint away or paint onto these sections in kind of a weird manner. I'm not too sure exactly how it calculates. I generally avoid scale. So that's something that, if you guys want a better explanation, we could look up together, or you can feel free to look it up. But I really don't use scale. Now for the smooth, this one is super important for you, because this is going to average out the effect. And let me go back up to the top a little bit so I can show you where this middle finger is. The effect that each one of these has on a certain area of geometry. And the effect is based off of these two. So I can try to, it won't let me select both. But basically, if you look at, I'll keep going back and forth. If you look at the vertices in the middle, how they're partially being affected by one joint and partially affected by the others through the grayscale or the gray values, what the smooth, and let me go back down here, what the smooth allows us to do is to have the, and let me make the brush a little bit larger, to have Maya kind of average out the effect that this joint has coming down this way. And you can see that a little bit more gray was added, and it's smoothing out this ramp. And if I come up here, this is kind of a hard line. If I go like that, you're going to see that I'm kind of smoothing that out as well. If I kept going up and up and up, at some point it's going to probably keep this white and have this kind of die off this way a little bit. And it could be so that I don't have such a hard edge there when I rotate that joint. The finger's going to bend a little bit more smoothly. And the same thing with how it's blending in between the pure white and the grays in this section. It will do the same thing with the grays as they die off this way. So watch, when I click and drag some more, you can faintly see it right here, but it's blending in the lighter values up here to the darker values this way. So this is a very nice tool to get a nice deformation and to clean up your deformations or to clean up some of the weights that you have created. So you can kind of do a bit of a sloppy job to get some of these joints to control certain vertices. So if I were to paint this one straight out this way, okay, and I would paint it with a hard brush, and this was a real hard edge, I would be able to smooth it out afterward so that it does die off this way and control some of these up to an extent. So these vertices will move nicely up to a point. Okay? So that's one way of working. You're going to see that if I select the other joint and I do a bit of the same thing, let me do that, and I click and drag this way, I'm able to fix those. If I give you more of a drastic example, I can take the opacity here, and instead of smoothing, I can replace, and I'll replace this with pure black. So I'll type in 0, hit enter, and I'm going to replace this with a hard brush, and I'll just go, okay, I want this to affect up to around this knuckle, so I'll just paint that away. Okay, and I'm also going to say that was too much, put the value to white right there. Oh, that's too much too. So I'll just kind of go, and now I've actually added on this finger here. So you want to be careful from your angles, but if I go a little bit slow, and I say that's a bit much, because I have a hard edge right there, I can smooth this out by clicking the smooth button here and just painting this. Now what's happening with this? Why do I have such a drastic change when I'm using the smooth option? Well, what's happening here is that I have an opacity of 1. And 1 in Maya, with most things, not everything, 1 is considered 100%. So I am smoothing this thing out at a brush value of 100%, or opacity value of 100%. If you guys are used to Photoshop, which you should be at this point, 100% in painting in Photoshop is going to paint like pure white or pure black. If you have a smooth brush, like this guy, it's going to paint pure white in the center, and it's going to die off like this gradient scale around the sides in a radius. Now I can determine this brush to be a percentage of a percentage, basically. So if you were painting at 10%, like 0.1, in Photoshop, it's kind of acting as though it's like a strength of a brush, as well as painting pure color in layman's terms. And I can do the smooth mode in percentages. So I can say I didn't want to smooth this out too much right there, and I can just kind of say that I want to be smoothing this out in percentages of 10. And it does add smoothness with each click. And you see if I come here to the pure white, I'm just going to kind of go over it this way so you guys can see that. I just click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and I'm doing it in percentages of 10. That's kind of a rough one. Let me do it 0.25 so you guys can see that. And I'll paint by clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging. And you're seeing that I'm doing it in percentages. It's getting a little bit lighter each time I go over it, only by 25%. And adding a smooth 25% each time. So 25% there, 25% there. Clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging. And this allows you to be a little more subtle with the way that you paint. That way you're not painting everything at one time. And you're not painting it too harshly or too softly. You can build it up. And the same thing goes with any of these tools. If you're using the replace mode, for instance, I want to replace it with pure white, but I want to replace it in percentages. So I want to be putting a little bit of opacity and a little bit more opacity each time. If you guys have ever worked with lighting, and you guys kind of see those the like little red and the blue screens that they put over the lights to get the colors. If you keep looking at those screens at first, it's pretty clear, it's pretty transparent. The more you add on there, like if you add another red screen to a red screen and keep going, it gets to be a bit more of a darker value or a pure value of red. Okay, and in this case it works in that same fashion for the most part. I mean, I don't know if that was the best example, but if I do opacity of 0.1, I'm going to say I will be adding or replacing the value at 10%. Okay, so I'll just replace, 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 replace. And you're going to see that all it's going to be able to do is replace it up to a certain point. And I'm adding up these every time I click and drag. And what happens is that the value that I can get to is a value of 100%, so pure white. That's the highest I can get, I can replace with. So if I keep painting in a certain spot, it won't go higher than 1, which is pure white. Alright, but I can get to pure white by adding 10% each time. So every click, like over here, you're going to see I am clicking and dragging, and I don't get to that from there until I keep clicking and dragging, and 100% is the highest I can go. I am replacing and replacing. I am adding and adding basically until I can get to 100%. Now, I could tell the value to work with the opacity and say that I want to paint in small percentages, but I want to go only up to maybe 25%. So that's like somewhere in the grays, right? So if I click and drag this way, I will be replacing this until I get to the highest value, which is 25%. And I'm replacing these in percentages of 10 until I can get to 25%. So in a sense, we can kind of add at the same time by using the replace, and we can add it up to a certain point, and the certain point being the value via percentages. The highest value is kind of like a limit. I can't go higher than 25% if I keep painting, and the opacity is going to be the strength, or how fast I can get there, how many clicks I'm going to have to do, how many layers I'm going to have to paint on there to get up to 25% white. And think of it as building up to that from where we were. In some cases, once you paint, like let's say if I had pure white, drag this out this way, just go like this at 100%, and I'm going to click and drag that, right? I'm getting some pure white in here, and just a few clicks and drags. Okay, nice. I can say, okay, well, I want to replace this to 0.25, 25%, and watch when I put this to 0.1, which is 10%. When I click and drag, and I'm clicking and dragging, now I'm if you want to think of it as subtracting, because how we have add right here, I'm subtracting down until I get to 25%. Now, in this case, I can't go lower than 25% because I was working from 1 and I'm minusing down till I hit here, and I'm saying I'm replacing this with 25%. So if I keep clicking and dragging over it, the lowest I can go is 25%. Okay? So when we were working from a value of 0, or the color black, up, by adding or replacing it to a 25 or a value of 25, we were working from 0 and we were working our way up this way. So if I go up the scale, we were painting in increments of 10% until we reached a limit of 25. And if I was painting on pure white, I was painting from a value of 1, and I was subtracting 10%, or replacing 10% by subtracting basically, till I got to 25, and I can't get any lower than 25% because that's what I was replacing it with. Now, those are real basic, easy ways of working with this, and for the most part, these are the straightforward ways of working with this. So, in the next section, I will just kind of go over some of the painting portions that we can do, like under the arm and stuff, and we'll play with the color, because the color is just going to be a color representation of the white and black that we're working with right now, using the same settings up here. For the weight types, what we've been doing is skin weight. We're not going to really do the DQ blend. And you're going to see that the normalization up here is going to be interactive, allowing us to do this as we're on the fly, painting. And the post is another thing that we're not really going to touch. These settings, these basic settings, are things that should get you across this whole section of painting weights. So in the next tutorial, we're going to get into looking over some of these, positioning the body a bit differently. I may have to fix that finger, I'm not sure. Just giving you a breakdown of how the tools worked. And we're going to see that we can actually even position some of these arms in a certain position where this is popping out, and we'll fix that by leaving that in that position, leaving that hand and arm in the position, and then fixing the weights as we go through there. So that can allow us to not have to animate the joints and play the animation back. But I do suggest you try both methods because you're going to be using both for sure.